Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the live stream here. I'm going to just get this posted on social media, and then we will take a look at all the stuff that's going on. We got a lot to talk about, so just stay tuned here for a couple minutes here while I get this posted real quick. Hi, Puget Sound Stormwatch in the chat. Thank you very much for joining, my friend. All right, let's get set to go here, folks. All right. We got a lot going on. We got a lot to talk about, and it all stems from that atmospheric river that is coming in here. Real quick, Anthony, Puget Sound Stormwatch there. Let me make you a moderator here on the stream. Add moderator. There we go. There we go. You are moderator now, Anthony. All right, so welcome everybody. Good evening. Hope everyone had a nice Saturday. I want to start here by just kind of taking a look at our overall pattern, what we have going on here across Western Washington. So starting here right now, you can see we have another system offshore right now. And this, what we're looking at right here, this is actually a weak atmospheric river that is starting to move into the area. And we can see that if we look at our integrated water vapor transport here. You can see that system. This is 8 o'clock tonight, so you can see that round of moisture that is starting to move into the area. And that's going to be a weak atmospheric river that moves into the area as we go through tomorrow. So not a huge deal. It's just going to bring a round of rain. We will take a look at that here on the radar. You see not much going on the radar right now. We have a few areas of showers that look like they're moving toward parts of the lowlands off the coast there. And you can see we have some light rain offshore, and that is starting to move in as well. As we go through this live stream, we will look at all of the forecast model updates. We will also take a look at some updates on the river flooding situation because there's a lot to talk about there. So starting here with the overall setup, which we will look at here on the European model, we're going to look at the precipitation type forecast. You can kind of see when all this stuff is going to be coming in here. So as we go into Sunday morning, you see we get this widespread rain moving into the area. That continues into Sunday afternoon and weekends as we get into Sunday evening. And then as we go into Sunday night, that rain calms down. We maybe get some lingering showers, especially north of Seattle. And then as we go into Monday morning, look at that. That atmospheric river just slams into Western Washington. Heavy rain. Look how high those snow levels get. That continues as we go into Tuesday about 4 a.m. And then it pushes south toward Portland and parts of Oregon. Weekends a little bit, not as heavy of rain there. And then as we go back into Tuesday night, it starts to move back northward again, and then through the day Wednesday, we get a lot more heavy rain across the area, but especially from basically Everett southward, as the atmospheric river seems to be trending to be aimed a little bit further south here, and that is going to continue all the way through Thursday into Friday there. And then by the time we get to Friday morning, that rain does stop across the area. And we can now compare that with the precipitable water. So precipitable water, you guys have probably heard me talking about that on the videos here the last couple days. And basically what precipitable water is how much water vapor is in the atmosphere. And that's a good way of measuring an atmospheric river because you're able to kind of see the amount of water vapor that's heading toward a given area. And that is very important. Obviously, that's something we want to be able to identify, and it helps us see how strong an atmospheric river is. You see that weak atmospheric river that moves through on Sunday. Saturday was actually mostly dry across the area. And then you can see the big atmospheric river coming in as we go into Monday morning. And you can see how that slams into western Washington through the day Monday. And then as we go into Monday night into Tuesday, it pushes south. And then you can see it stays over Oregon as we go through the day Tuesday, and then moves back north into western Washington as we go through Tuesday night into Wednesday, and continues across the area all the way through the day Wednesday, and then into Thursday through most of Thursday before pushing out of the area as we go into Friday. And you can see here it's still around. This atmospheric river, it just pushes up toward Haida Gwaii because we get a ridge building right here. You can see that, how it gets pushed around that ridge. And we may have some more atmospheric river type situations going on here over the next couple weeks. We have a lot of potential for that kind of thing. So now we can take a look briefly at precipitation totals. This is the afternoon run of the European model, and you can see we'll just drag this all the way out through the end of this forecast model run. And you can see these are obviously some pretty big totals for western Washington. So taking a look here, we can look at this in detail. You got 2.5 inches in Bellingham and on Whidbey Island in the San Juans, about 3 inches in Mount Vernon, 3.5 inches in Arlington, 2.5 inches in Everett. And that's kind of where this rain shadow is, because the atmospheric river moves in from the west. The Olympic Mountain rain shadow, and to an extent here, the Vancouver Island range rain shadow there. If there's any Canadians in the chat, please correct me on what the mountain name is there on Vancouver Island. I really don't know. That rain shadow up from about Nanaimo all the way down towards Seattle is because of these mountains along the coast that calm down those rain totals a little bit, because not much is getting through. So once you go south of Seattle, so Seattle itself getting about 3.5 inches of rain through this week, pretty significant for Seattle. But as you go further south with the Olympic Mountains not blocking as much, you can see how those totals really increase. You're looking at about 4 inches in Tacoma, 5.5 inches in Olympia, 5.5 inches down through Centralia, about 3.5 inches in Portland, 4.5 inches in Longview. And then as you look at the coast there, you're looking at about 4 inches around Forks and La Push, and then 6.5 inches or so there around Grays Harbor County, and then down the Oregon coast, 6 to about 8 inches of rain there. So really some pretty significant totals down there on the coast. And then take a look at some of the coast range. You have the Olympic Mountains, Willapa Hills, both getting anywhere between 7 to 10 inches of rain. And look at the Cascades. This is the root of that river flooding there in the Cascades. You see basically 10 to 15 inches of rain. And this European model run was actually, we can look at this on the drier side of the ensembles, and it wasn't even really that close. So if we look at the plume here, this is kind of what you're looking at. You can see it through the atmospheric river, it's a little bit drier than some of the other ensembles, especially as you go toward the middle of the week with that second pulse from the atmospheric river. It stays a little bit drier. So that's interesting to see. There's still a lot of wiggle room, a lot of wobbling around with this forecast, and we kind of have been seeing that. You can see the confidence is good for that first round of rain as we go through Monday into Tuesday. And there is, you're looking at about 1.5 to 2 inches of rain in 24 hours. And in Seattle, that's pretty significant. And you can see how that may change a little bit, this 24-hour precipitation forecast here, if we put in, say, another airport. So let's put in Olympia. You see you got a higher amount of rain and then better confidence in another round of rain moving into the area. Even if you go as far north as, say, Tacoma, you still have a little bit more rain showing up than in Seattle. And then if you go down towards somewhere like Chehalis, you can see, again, a little bit higher confidence in some of that rain. Of course, the winners for the rain are going to be some of those higher places where you do get a little bit more of that orographic lift effect as the mountains kind of wring out the atmospheric river, so to speak, kind of like a sponge, that kind of type of thing. Like, picture the clouds as a big sponge and you wringing out the sponge as the mountains. That's what happens when an atmospheric river hits the mountains. Checking in the chat here. Hey, Brian, thank you for joining us tonight. Justin, thank you for joining us as well. Puget Sound could get some landslides, definitely. That is possible, especially as we go toward the end of the week, as you get some of these higher totals here. We can see some of those totals showing up on the National Blended Models here all the way through the end of the week. I mean, you're looking at 3 to 5 inches for most of the lowlands, especially some areas with some hills. Landslides are definitely going to be a threat, and up in the mountains as well, you have a decent landslide threat. If we take a look at snow totals, is kind of an interesting thing to look at. There's not much snow really that falls. You can see the European model showing through the end of the week like big snow totals at Stevens Pass and some of the North Cascades. My guess is that there's some terrain resolution issues going on here, because Stevens Pass was supposed to get some pretty big amounts of snow today, and that to an extent did not really happen. We can actually look at it pretty quickly here. So let's take a look here. This is Snoqualmie Pass. And we'll let this load here on the WashDOT site. You can see it's raining at Snoqualmie Pass. But if we look at Stevens Pass, there was a winter storm warning in effect for Stevens Pass today, and they were supposed to get a lot of snow, but you can see it's 37 degrees and the road is wet. So that didn't verify. And so what that is telling me is that the forecast models, especially the European, are not resolving the terrain very well, and thus when you look at a map like this, you're going to see way less of this. If you were really when we're talking about what's going to happen in reality, you're not going to see 20 inches of snow this week at Stevens Pass. You're going to see more like maybe 1 to 4. And that is, again, because the atmospheric river comes in here and really warms things up. And you can see that as we look at the high temperatures here on the European model. I mean, look at this. This is Monday. You have highs at Stevens Pass, Snoqualmie Pass here showing up at like 42 degrees. So that's not going to be snow. There flat out won't be snow at that elevation, something like that. So you're going to be getting rain for all the mountains. Even some of the highest elevations will be only the parts that get snow. So you're talking a snow level maybe as high as like 8,000 feet or so. And you can tell that that's the case because of our river flooding forecast here, which paints basically the picture here that every river draining the Cascades is going to be in some sort of flood stage. And we did have a couple of upgrades here. You can see the Cowlitz River way up in the major flood stage, all the way up in Packwood. And that's pretty significant because that doesn't usually happen. The one thing that is kind of interesting about some of these forecasts is that they show these rivers cresting on Monday night into Tuesday and then diminishing rapidly after that. But the thing is, the flood often takes time to get down the rivers, and I have often seen that these river flooding forecasts are off by a few hours to even a few days, and that they do end up moving around a bit as we go through the period ahead of the storm. And so that's something that we have to watch because, for example, here's the Snoqualmie River at Snoqualmie Falls. The latest forecast here shows it getting into major flood stage for the first time in a few years. That's a pretty significant thing, but it shows that atmospheric river starts hitting the Pacific Northwest, starts hitting into western Washington here on Monday morning, and it shows that by 4 a.m. on Tuesday, that entire flood has already made it down the Snoqualmie River, and then it just diminishes after that. But that's not going to happen. It's not possible for the flood to go that quickly down the river, and those flooding forecasts are likely going to be delayed a little bit from what you're kind of seeing here. So you can see the Snoqualmie River at Carnation. Again, it shows that crest on Tuesday and then it diminishes, but I don't think it's going to be that quick. So it's something we have to watch closely to see how it plays out, but I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as that is showing. You can see Eastern Washington going to get some flooding too. I see Justin asked, there is the Yakima River going to flood in southeast Washington and Prosser in the Tri-Cities, and this is the gauge for the Yakima River there. It's going to get to bank full. It's not going to get into flood stage, but it is going to be at action stage, which is really when the river is completely at its banks. It's not really overflowing yet, except in some very vulnerable places, but it is getting at flood stage there. And that we're getting to bank full, which is, it may look like flood stage to the untrained eye, or if you don't know the categories. And you can see all the yellow squares are rivers that are going to get into action stage. This orange is minor flood stage, red is moderate flood stage, and then the magenta colors are major flood stage, which is basically when you're nearing the record but not getting quite there just yet. And basically, we'll stay on this for a minute. If we go north to south, you can see that You see, we get the Nooksack River and action stage at Bankful. The Skagit River gets to moderate flood stage. The Stillaguamish River gets to minor flood stage. The entire system of the Skykomish, Tolt, Snoqualmie, and Snohomish rivers all get to moderate to major flood stage. Snoqualmie Valley likely will get hit hard with this event. And some of the rivers that drain into the Central Sound that don't often flood will get to Bankful, including the Cedar River, the Green River, and the White River, in addition to the Carbon River getting to minor flood stage, same with South Prairie Creek, and then the Puyallup River at Ording potentially getting all the way up to moderate flood stage, which is very unusual. And then at Puyallup itself getting up toward Bankful or maybe right at flood stage, which itself is pretty rare. Nisqually River down near National getting up toward moderate flood stage. Then the Deschutes River, the Skookumchuck River, the Newaukum River, and then the Chehalis River all flooding their action stage on a couple, minor to moderate on the Chehalis. And then down, of course, by Packwood and Randall, the Cowlitz River getting way up into major flood stage. Puget Sound Storm Watch says Puyallup could hit major in Ording. It's getting close. This is really close. And that hasn't happened in, I mean, let's see how long it's been since that happened. That is pretty unusual, actually, for the Puyallup River to get that high. I'm not sure it'll show us here on this page the last time that the Puyallup River got into major flood stage, which would be like 11 and a half feet, I think. Yeah, the last time it got up to that level was way back in 2015. Yeah, there's definitely going to be some flooding across the area. But the thing I would really tell everyone who's looking at this is that it is really take it with a grain of salt right now, the timing, because there's a lot of vulnerability or variability in this, that I have seen these timing forecasts be off quite a bit. So let's watch that closely over the next few days. Obviously, I'll talk about it in all my videos. And if you guys in the chat there want to know about a specific river, I'll have this page open the entire stream, and we can look at individual rivers, and we can look at how each one is going to react to this atmospheric river moving through the area. I'm checking in the chat there. A unofficial Washington State wildfire aware. Welcome to the chat, my friend. Let me make you a moderator as well. It helps me out a bit there. There we go. You should be a moderator now. Unofficial Washington State wildfire aware. There. And of course, I forgot to mention it because it happens so often. But the Skokomish River out there by Potlatch and Hood Canal will be flooding as usual, and you can see with that one, you got the whole issue of the sediment, and that the river can't actually hold that much water, and it basically is like flooding for 4 days. So that's kind of an interesting thing to see, but then again, not at all unusual out there. Skykomish, Tolt, Snoqualmie, and then the Snoqualmie and Skykomish combine and turn into the Snohomish River. All of that does flood. And also, has anyone ever noticed around here how many of our rivers start with S? It's pretty funny to me that you have like 5 of them, which is quite interesting. So now we can kind of take a look at why some of these rivers are flooding. Obviously, it's because of the atmospheric river, but it's when you look at this map and then you look back here and you see what's going on in terms of the precipitation that's falling in the Cascades, that kind of shows you why you're getting some of this flooding. You can see when you get the Snoqualmie River kind of drains these areas here in King County, and you're getting 10 to 12 inches of rain in a week there in the Snoqualmie Valley or the Snoqualmie River basin there, especially those mountains, and that all drain through the Snoqualmie Valley, and that is why you get some of that flooding. You can see down here toward Mount Rainier, some of the areas that the Cowlitz River drains, getting up toward maybe even 15 inches of rain in just a few days. And even around the Columbia River Gorge, look at that. You got 16 inches of rain showing up in some of these places. If we look down toward the Portland area, you can see we do have some flooding of some of these rivers in Portland there, around Portland. Clackamas River, Johnson Creek. I don't know this area as well. The Willamette River might even get toward Bankful. That's pretty interesting to see. And of course, the Columbia doesn't flood, but it will likely rise. This is the Columbia River at Vancouver, Washington there. Let this one load. You can see how it is still controlled by the tide all the way inland that far. And you can see it rises a bit, the Columbia does, but flood stage is 16 feet and it's going to be at 10.5. That's one of the benefits, although it is in some ways a controversial situation. That's one of the benefits of having all the dams on the Columbia, is that you don't get a lot of flooding there. As far as eastern Washington goes, it's going to be the Yakima River and the Natchez River that may get to bank full stage, but likely will not get into flood stage. There, the Klickitat River may also get into action stage. And then you can see on the Oregon coast, you have the Siletz River and the Wilson River, and then the Nehalem River also all getting up in toward action stage or flood stage there. Asked in the chat there, what about the Skookumchuck? Let's take a look. This one's been fluctuating quite a bit. You can see that the Skookumchuck near Bucota, that's just outside Centralia, Chehalis, is likely going to get into bank full stage and may get close to minor flood stage. Again, we'll see if this kind of moves around a bit, because this was just showing like a couple days ago that this is going to be at flood stage, and it may still be. So there will likely be some flooding impacts there around the Skookumchuck. We can look at the full data here and kind of see what this level of flooding means at the Skookumchuck River. Excuse me. So you're looking at about 211 feet. Says Skookumchuck River in Thurston County will flood a few roads and low pasture lands near Bucota. So not too significant there, but it may flood a few areas. I really like the impacts page you kind of see there on the river flooding site. So, for example, we can look at the Snoqualmie River, and then you look at the amount of rain, or the amount of the water level there, and it's basically 58.5 feet on the Snoqualmie River at Carnation, which is major flood stage. If you are in the Snoqualmie Valley, there's going to be a lot of road closures and stuff like that. So at 58 feet, you can see the Snoqualmie River will cause major flooding from Fall City downstream through Carnation and Duval. Deep and swift flood waters will inundate many farms, residential areas, and roads. Flooding will occur all along the river, including headwaters, tributaries, and other streams within and near the Snoqualmie River basin. So it's basically just everything. Everything floods. If we do get to 58 feet, that'd be the highest crest on the Snoqualmie River since 2022. I was in that flood. I went out to that area to see some of the flooding. It was a pretty good flood back in 2022 there in March. We got 3 inches of rain in one day here in Federal Way with that event, and that is something to look at as well. Actually, it just reminded me there when I was talking about it. 24-hour precipitation totals play a big part in how you get flooding and when that flooding occurs, because when you get really big flooding totals, big flooding in the rivers and stuff like that, is because you get big rain totals in a 24-hour period. And you can kind of see that as we go through Monday into Tuesday there. You see you getting like 2 inches of rain in 24 hours for parts of the lowlands, mainly south of Seattle. And then look at some of the Cascades here. You're getting 4 to 6 inches in 24 hours. And then that atmospheric river pushes south toward parts of Oregon, so those totals go down a little bit. But then it does move back up into western Washington briefly there on Wednesday, and you get, again, a couple more inches there in the Cascades. And that is why you get some of those higher flooding areas, because you get these periods of heavier rain. And that can cause more flooding across the region. Let me check in the chat here. Today, a tree aided by wind was already dead and leaning near Highway 302 fell on a car with 1 fatality. That's very sad to see. And yes, the dead trees are a very big problem. Something you have to always watch out for when you're in a windstorm is that unhealthy trees can definitely do some damage, and unfortunately can cause fatalities. So I'm sorry to hear that there was a fatality last night there up in the Carnation area along Highway 203. We can take a look also at that windstorm. We are going to have another wind event kind of coming in here as we go into Monday. But this storm that we had last night definitely overperformed from our forecast models. And if we take a look at our maximum wind gusts last night, let me set this to show only gusts over 35 miles per hour. That will help us out a little bit. And this will kind of show you what was going on. Yeah, so we had some pretty big winds down in parts of the South Sound. 54 miles an hour in Shelton, 51 at Tacoma Narrows, 52 in the Port of Tacoma, 50 there at Browns Point, 49 at SeaTac, 46 at Boeing Field, 49 over in North Bend, and 48 there in West Seattle. There were power outages across the region. Of course, we didn't have as many power outages as we would have a while back if we hadn't had our previous windstorm back in October, but there were still some power outages. I think at peak PSE had around 15,000 people out of power, which is pretty significant for a random storm in early December. And some mountain ridge tops got some just eye-popping numbers here last night. This station at Chinook Pass is called Chinook Pass Summit, but it's about 1,000 feet above Chinook Pass. Gusted to 96 miles an hour. The summit of Crystal Mountain gusted to 75 miles per hour. Got 64 miles per hour there at Camp Muir and at the upper part of Sunrise on Mount Rainier. And then you had 74 there at Alpental. And then we did have some bigger winds up here along parts of the Strait of Juan de Fuca with that westerly surge that moved through. This doesn't reflect it. This page doesn't, but I believe Dungeness Spit did gust to 58 miles per hour, if I have that, or 56 miles per hour last night. 48 miles an hour in Port Angeles, which is pretty strong. 60 miles per hour, strongest gust in the lowlands on Smith Island, which is offshore of Whidbey. 48 miles per hour there on Whidbey Island. So not as strong as it could have been there, with some of the forecasts showing up towards 60 miles per hour on Whidbey, but still definitely some big gusts there. Let me check in the chat again. Has anyone sounded the alarms about the cliffs of the Sound and homes above those cliffs? Always seemed like a topic that is only discussed and when some damage. Yeah, that is definitely concern when you get... We can show it again when we get all this rain, especially when you get it in a short period of time. The landslide risk does go up, and especially, I mean, there's a lot of areas along Puget Sound that have some very, very sheer cliffs, and it just drops off immediately as soon as you go, sometimes just past a fence line at some people's homes. So that is definitely a concern. If you do live on a cliff, even if it's not right on Puget Sound, if it is on the side of a valley or something like that, we got a lot of valleys around here, the landslide risk is going to go up, and you do have to be prepared, especially if you're up in the Cascade foothills, or if you're in areas, especially from Seattle southward, that landslide threat is higher. So be aware of that, especially if you're on some of the bluffs, if you're by one of the valleys, if you're in an area that you know is prone to landslides. Be careful and stay aware of that threat. I did want to point out as well, we will have some more wind coming up here. And then a little bit of a concern is kind of what happens on Monday in terms of wind strength. You see the the NAM model here showing through Sunday afternoon. You're looking at about, or Sunday morning there, you're looking maybe Sunday mid-morning there, gusting up toward 35 to 40 miles per hour for parts of the Central Sound. But then take a look as we go into Monday here, and we get some stronger winds moving into the area here. Take a look at what the NAM model shows. Some of those gusts nearing 45 to 50 miles per hour across parts of the Central Sound there. You can see 48 in Seattle, 49 down in South Hill, 48 in Tacoma, 48 in Bremerton, 47 in Shelton there on Monday. And that is happening because of some of the dynamics associated with that atmospheric river moving in. You get some pressure gradients on the south side. Take a look at some of these gusts it's showing on the coast. 56 in Hoquiam, 60 along some of the beaches from Ocean Shores down toward Westport and the Long Beach Peninsula, 57 in Astoria. And some big gusts in the mountain ridge tops as usual. And the interesting thing about this is that we are going to be getting a lot of rain as this happens, and that could cause some potential power outage issues if you're having the rain and that saturates the ground and all that. You can see on the NAM model as we go just through early Tuesday morning, we're looking at likely 1.5 inches of rain in Seattle, 2 to 2.5 inches for parts of the South Sound, and maybe up toward 3.5 inches for Shelton and the coast. And when you have all that falling with some winds moving through, you can get more power outages than usual, especially with the NAM model here showing winds gusting up toward 45 to 50 miles per hour there on Monday. And the thing that you kind of have to note is that all of these forecast models were really spectacularly wrong yesterday in terms of those winds in the South Sound. I mean, you had the Tacoma gust of 52 miles per hour. You didn't have anything even showing 50. So that's pretty significant, and it is noteworthy. So it's something we do have to watch. We can also take a look at the high-resolution rapid refresh model. That is another one of our higher-resolution forecasts here, and we can take a look at what it is showing for some of those gusty winds as well. You can see 30 to 35 miles per hour tomorrow. But then as we go into Monday, we'll see what this does. It's trying to cause a little bit more problems here. I can see this is showing up toward 50 to 52 miles per hour there, maybe around Tacoma, and 45 in Seattle, 50 in Everett, 50 on the Kitsap Peninsula and over in Shelton. Maybe a little bit on the higher side, but then again, I don't have very much confidence in any of these forecasts after they spectacularly missed yesterday's storm. And again, some pretty savage gusts here in the the ridge tops there, and that color is like 97 miles an hour or something down to some of the southern Cascades. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, you can see it's showing about 50 miles per hour in Tacoma. Who knows? Maybe it's picking up on some failings from the previous storm. So we could definitely have some wind problems as we go through Monday afternoon there. And then you can see on the coast 45 miles per hour up in La Push, and then you get a little bit stronger as you go down toward Hoquiam, 55 miles per hour, 57 to 60 miles per hour there down toward Long Beach. Benjamin Yurkovic of Washington Weather Chasers in the house here. Let me make him a moderator too. Gonna have all the moderators in here. There we go. Ben, you should be a moderator as well. Welcome to the chat, Ben. Thank you for joining. Again, so we're looking here at the HRRR. Maybe a little bit too high. Again, I don't have too much confidence in this kind of thing right now, just given how things went with the previous storm. Again, way higher than the model predictions. I did get some messages and some comments from people saying it was pretty windy across parts of the South Sound last night, and it definitely was. I got some pretty strong gusts in parts in Federal Way where I am, and some of those gusts were hitting pretty hard, and that was not really expected. Again, if this were October and this was happening, we'd be dealing with a lot of power outages with widespread gusts toward 50 miles per hour, but all those leaves are off the trees. All those vulnerable trees, for the most part, have been taken down. Of course, not all of them, as we unfortunately saw on Highway 203 earlier in the Snoqualmie Valley, where we did have one fatality. Most of the trees are down, but most of the trees that have been weakened are down, but not all of them, unfortunately. So there are still going to be trees that fall. There is still going to be damage in some areas, but it's not going to be like what we would see in one of our first storms of the season, something like that. So yeah, let me take a drink of water here real quick, folks. All right. And again, if you guys want to look at anything specific, be sure and put it in the chat. And got questions about rivers or about wind or about how much rain a certain place is going to get, all that, we can put it in the chat. One thing that is also helpful to look at is the University of Washington model. I mean, I'm a little bit biased in thinking that some of the things this model can do is pretty cool, given that I am a student at the University of Washington now. But we can look at the previous run here, because it looks like it is running right now. And if we go down to our 4-kilometer run here, this recently just got extended out to 120 hours, so we can see out a little bit better with some of these higher resolution things here on the University of Washington's forecast. So this is through Thursday morning here, and you can see it's showing some pretty big rain totals for parts of the area, but it's also showing that rain shadow pretty well. So we'll have to see kind of how this plays out. This looks like it is a little bit on the lower end through Thursday morning, but you can see it shows that rain shadow mainly from Seattle straight north up through into British Columbia, basically up the Puget Sound and then into the Strait of Georgia. And you can see again those areas that get enhanced, like North Bend and even some of the foothills down toward like Maple Valley, Covington, and Enumclaw, and then down from Tacoma southward through Olympia and down the I-5 corridor, and then of course on the coast getting some pretty big totals as well. And then you can see in the Cascades, this is the one thing that is certain regardless, that even if you're down in Seattle you don't get much rain, or even if you're in the Snoqualmie Valley and you don't get a ton of rain, the mountains above you are going to be wringing out that precipitation anyway and could get over 10 inches. Brian Rock Railfan says, how's it going to be in Kelso, Washington? Well, we can take a look at a couple things here. River flooding, not likely to be a huge problem in Kelso. The Cowlitz River will rise, and it will be higher than normal. But right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be above flood stage. It looks like it's just going to be looks like it's just going to be an action stage, which is bankful. However, Kelso likely going to get some pretty big rain totals with this atmospheric river. You can see as we put this all the way out through Friday night, and you can see Kelso likely getting 5.5 inches of rain through this week. So that is obviously pretty significant. That's a good portion of your December rainfall. In Kelso, you're going to get it in just a week here. So 5.5 inches looks pretty likely for Kelso. So Brian, that is your forecast for there. Let's also take a look, and just because up at the extended forecast, and kind of see what happens next. So you can see as the atmospheric river pushes out of the area as we go into Friday, it's still there, and it is going to actually hit us again as we go through Saturday. You can see it pushes down through the area and pushes out, but it'll be acting more like a front and just moving through somewhat quickly. Then we dry out, but then as we go into the next week there, you can see we do have some more systems coming through, and both forecast models have started to show potentially another atmospheric river as we go into next week there. So this is looking about 10 days out in the forecast. So kind of take it with a grain of salt at this point, but I believe the GFS model was showing something similar, at least a couple days ago it was. And you can see that it is showing that toward the end of this run as we go out toward Wednesday that there are more atmospheric river type signatures out there. Where it goes, where it ends up is a little bit undetermined at this point, but both forecast models do show potential for more atmospheric rivers as we go toward the latter part of next week. Not this upcoming week when we have this atmospheric river, but the week after we may have even more. So that is something to watch closely, but also not too closely because we don't want to concern ourselves with something that isn't likely at this time. This is something we can take a look at, the atmospheric river scale. This is put out by the University of California, San Diego water. I forget the official name of it, but it is their Institute for Studies of Water Phenomena with weather and stuff like that. So basically what they do is they take 5 categories, and we can look at this in depth here. Right? Let me load it up right here, the atmospheric river scale. So this is from the Center for Western and Weather and Water Extremes at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. This is the premier site to go to for atmospheric river forecasting because, again, and I've talked about this recently, an atmospheric river, that is a real term. It does seem like, I know, something that's used as kind of like a flashy grab your attention type of thing, especially in recent years, especially with some of the big ones that have hit California. But again, what we have to remember is that atmospheric river is a real term. It is a real meteorological phenomena that happens somewhat frequently. And the definition of an atmospheric river is a long, narrow current of moisture that brings a continuous amount of rainfall for a continuous or set period of time. And you can see that's exactly what we have right here. That's exactly what this plot is showing here on Wednesday there, for example, with that atmospheric river moving into western Washington. You can see how it stretches from sometimes we get them stretching from Hawaii straight up in the northwest. That's your classic Pineapple Express. This one's stretching from not directly in Hawaii, but actually if you zoom out a little bit, it's stretching, I believe, from somewhere all the way near the Philippines, which is pretty cool to see. Here is the northern Pacific wide view. You can see it stretches out from about the middle of the Pacific, but if we play it back a little bit, we might be able to see how that moisture fetch really lines up there. So right there, you can see as the atmospheric river is approaching the west coast of North America, it stretches from all the way back south of Japan, back toward the Philippines. I heard someone call it the Mango Express instead of pineapple for Hawaii, mango for the Philippines. I thought that was interesting. That's another way to talk about it. But overall, yeah, an atmospheric river, it's not a hype term. It's not a term meant to scare anybody. It's just a term that happens. So let's see. You got a question in here. Preset forecast for next week. In Apple weather, you see the rain falls on the lower side Tuesday and Wednesday. Does that mean the atmospheric river scale decreases? Not really. That's a good question, Jason. Thank you for that. The atmospheric river scale is based on the amount of water vapor that's hitting the coast there, and that's where they get the categories. It doesn't really categorize things for inland, but we are going to likely have our biggest rain days Monday and then Wednesday and Thursday. Specifically Monday, likely getting the most rain there, and we'll talk about that again in tomorrow's video a little bit, and we may do a live stream tomorrow night. We'll see. But the atmospheric river scale is mainly based on the water vapor values that hit the coast and not necessarily on how much rain falls inland. But how much rain falls total, especially on the coast here, is how they get the matrix that they use. And you can see that right here. So this is, let's select a location on the Washington coast. We'll use the European model. And you can see this event right here. It is the orange one highlighted. And they look at your maximum water vapor values, the duration of the atmospheric river, and then use that as a math formula to come up with a category forecast. And what you're seeing right here, this matrix is how they determine the strength of the atmospheric river. So as we go in here on one side, on your y-axis on the left side here, you have your maximum values of water vapor, and then on the right side you have showing these category numbers. So category 0 is not an atmospheric river. Category 1 is a very weak atmospheric river. Category 2 is a weak atmospheric river. 3 is moderate. 4 is strong. 5 is extreme to exceptional. And then you also have time here. So the longer an atmospheric river is, the higher its category is going to be. That shows kind of this number B. They say this is, so A is this one that already happened a couple days ago. B is the next one that's coming up. You can see it's right on the verge of potentially being a category 5 atmospheric river for some of the coast. So also I just heard that Mango Express, I heard it on Discord from a weather friend of mine, and it was also used by our great meteorologist on Como, Shannon O'Donnell. She used that as well. So it's kind of a fun one just to kind of put it into context, like where it's coming from. Is, of course, we have the popular term Pineapple Express that's been popularized from some previous atmospheric rivers back many years ago that did stretch straight from Hawaii. And then, so yeah, back to the category here, you can see we're pretty close to this being a category 5 atmospheric river, which is interesting to see. And then again, that isn't something, it sounds very hype term type of thing and very scary. It's really not, and it's really more meant to be a way for meteorologists and researchers to kind of observe these and see how strong they are. A category 5 atmospheric river in itself is actually quite rare, and usually we just get a lot of category 4 atmospheric rivers. One thing that is worth noting on this right here is that this chart, I selected this for the South Washington coast, and you can see how you have 2 batches of moisture, how that first stronger batch of moisture is followed by a second longer batch of moisture, and that's how we're going to get most of our rain. You get that first big round of moisture on Monday, and you get the wind with it across western Washington. Then we calm down a little bit on Tuesday, and then as we go on into Wednesday and Thursday, and then all the way back into Friday too, we get a longer batch of moisture that moves into the area. Let me catch up on the chat here. Ben uses Yahoo Weather for his forecast models. Nice. Ben uses Pivotal Weather, I believe, and that's a pretty nice site. They've really done some nice upgrades there. I use WeatherBell. It's another nice forecast model site here. You can see that. Will it be windy in Sammamish on Monday? That's what Nadia asked. Let's take a look at that. Yes, it will be. Sammamish is an area where you can get some gusty winds. We had a 50-mile-per-hour gust up in Newcastle yesterday, and you can see that on this forecast here, you do get about 45 to 47 miles per hour up there in Sammamish. I'm curious what the European model is showing with this, because I actually haven't looked at it. The European model also showing gusts near 40 miles per hour. Oh, Peter Sound Stormwatch says Ben transitioned to WeatherBell. Oh yeah, he did say that. I forgot that he did that. Yeah, WeatherBell is definitely the best. If you want a good forecast model thing to look at, if you want to pay the money, use WeatherBell. It is really worth it. I really enjoy it. So yeah, Nadia, to answer your question, windy on Monday in Sammamish, about 45 miles per hour or so, maybe a little bit more if we trend a little bit higher, like some of what happened yesterday with our storm. But I would expect 45 mile per hour gusts or so. And to everybody watching, it is going to be windy on Monday, but that doesn't mean there's going to be widespread power outages, because again, we have gotten a lot of the weak stuff. We've kind of got everything pruned out, so to speak, and we will have some sporadic power outages as always, and we will also have some power outages due to the saturated ground, because we will have a lot of rain falling at the same time, and we have had a decent amount of rain over the past couple of months. And mountain snow forecasts have been so wrong in the last month or two. It always seems to look like it'll get colder in a week or 10 days, and then it doesn't happen. That is true. You often get a lot of things showing up in the extended forecast that are really not worth your time to look at, because we just know it's not going to happen. So there are a lot of times where even on your weather app, you'll look out like 7 days and you'll see, oh, it looks like it's going to snow, and it ends up not. And that's because the forecast models really are trying to figure things out way out in the extended forecast, and often they figure it out wrong, and then a couple days later they completely flip, and it goes from showing snow 10 days out in the forecast to showing it being mostly sunny. Molly says in the chat, king tides possible. King tides, yeah, it's not going to play a huge part in this right now, because I think we're kind of calming down a little bit. Our peak king tides are we'll see how that plays out. Let me look at the Washington. We do have a nice site here at the University of Washington. The Washington Sea Grant site here kind of shows some of those king tide forecasts, and it does look like we will have some high-ish tides there as we go into the king tides end on the coast today, but they may continue in the lowlands as we go, in parts of Puget Sound in the Strait as we go into Monday and Tuesday. You can see that Monday tide in Seattle, 13 feet, 7:30 in the morning. The nice thing is that the winds will not be the winds will not be strong enough in the morning to cause problems with the king tides. The strongest winds are later in the day, so with the king tides in the Sound peaking in the morning and then starting to go down, we should be okay. I don't anticipate huge amounts of coastal flooding, because if we look back at these winds and we kind of see when they increase, that high tide is about 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning, and you can see we don't really start gusting up toward 40 miles per hour across the lowlands until around 10 to 11 a.m. And then those peak winds look likely noon through maybe 3 to 4 p.m. There were some nice king tides this morning, especially out on the coast. Yeah. Brian Rockwell fan asked, what's it going to be in Chehalis? You mean wind in Chehalis? Wind won't be too much. It'll be only about 40 miles per hour, maybe a little bit less, down toward 35 miles per hour. Rain in Chehalis will be another story, likely about 5 inches through the end of the week. All right, so let's continue to take a look. We can look at the GFS model. I believe the GFS is running right now, and that'll give us a little bit better of a look at kind of what's going on with the atmospheric river. So again, here we're looking at the forecast for precipitable water, which is that amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. You see that little system going into Oregon and parts of Washington tomorrow, and then we dry out briefly, and then here comes the big atmospheric river as we go into Monday. And you can see the GFS model agreeing with the European, and a lot of rain hitting western Washington on Monday. It moves south into Oregon on Tuesday and remains in Oregon all the way into Tuesday night before starting to spread a little bit more back up into western Washington, but it doesn't really as much. And then you can see as we go into Thursday or through Wednesday there, it moves back up into western Washington a little bit more, then is aimed straight at western Washington as we go through Thursday. And then it starts to push out of the area by the time we get out toward Friday. It stays just to our north all the way through the weekend, and then we get maybe another atmospheric river potential as it moves back through Monday into Tuesday, and then you see even more moisture out there still, but likely being shunted a little bit further south toward California. Again, looking pretty far out in the extended forecast here. We can take a look at the GFS model's latest precipitation totals, though, and kind of see how it shows things. Again, very similar to the European model, actually, just showing a little bit more of a rain shadow for areas from Seattle northward toward Everett and Bellingham. So that's kind of what we're looking at. That if you are south of Seattle, you're going to get a lot more rain than if you're north of Seattle or in Seattle itself. Even parts of the Kitsap Peninsula are going to get rain shadowed with some of this. And when we're talking about rain shadows, it's not the same as like when you getting like a bunch of rain on the south slopes of the Olympics and like no rain at all in swim. It's not going to be like that. Swim and stuff is still going to get an inch of rain out of this, maybe even more. But that rain shadow effect is going to be noticeable because of how the Olympics play a part with these atmospheric rivers moving in. Because that's the other thing about atmospheric rivers is that they're pretty low elevation. All of that moisture in an atmospheric river is bottled up in the low elevations, like below 5,000 feet or something like that. And that's why they can have really big rain shadows. Like you can even see here, big rain shadow as you look at going across the Cascades there. Brian asked, could it flood near Chehalis, Washington? Let's take a look at the river forecast here. Got that refreshed. And yes, there could be flooding in Chehalis. You kind of got three rivers to watch. You have the Skookumchuck that moves in from the east. You have the Newaukum that moves in from the south. And then you have the Chehalis River itself that moves through the entire valley. And it looks like right now that the Newaukum is going to flood for sure. The Chehalis and Skookumchuck are a little bit more undetermined at this time, but I would expect they will both rise significantly and may get to bank full or very close to flood stage. So yes, Brian, flooding is very possible in the Chehalis area. Something else we can take a look at here too is wind gust on the European Models Ensemble. Kind of see if we're picking out any members that may be a little bit higher here. So this is looking at SeaTac Airport. You can see it's not showing nearly as much as some of those high resolution forecasts, but the European model has honestly not been very good over the last few wind events. You're really only looking at it's been just pretty low. So yeah, it's not entirely worth it's not entirely worth the it's just not exactly worth looking at here. Sorry about that. But the NAM model, some of those high resolution ones, they got the closest yesterday. The European model showed 40, showed 39 in Seattle, and you get 49 at SeaTac. So that's a 10 mile an hour difference in wind is actually pretty significant. So we can look at the extended forecast for those who would like to do that. We can look at the Climate Prediction Center and kind of take a look at some of the stuff we're looking at here. So here's your 8 to 14 day temperature and precipitation outlooks. This is basically your second half of December. So this is December 14th to 20th and issued today. And you can see here, you get that, sorry about that, there we go, above average temperatures across basically the entire West. And then above average precipitation as well for most of the northern tier of the country. Looking out for what's expected this month, we were expected to be near average in most regards, and we probably will end up getting pretty close to that, temperature and precipitation being near average. And then here's your classic La Nina look here as we go through December, January, February, but slightly below average temperatures and slightly above average precipitation. Classic La Nina, almost perfect. Looking at the drought monitor, you can see we are still in moderate drought here across western Washington. But you can see that drought removal or drought improval likely there. So that's good to see. We will likely get better with this drought situation. But we are pretty below average here in a lot of respects, from our reservoirs to our just precipitation totals over the last couple years, really. And despite having these nice atmospheric rivers and stuff like that, we are still not doing very good on our precipitation. So if we look at our departure from average, I think we're going to do this one, the year to date. Our departure from average in inches is quite bad. But something else is, it's better to look at the percent of average here. So here is your precipitation percent of average this year. And you're looking at some pretty dismal amounts for the entire state, really. I mean, with the exception of some of these areas in the Columbia Basin that may have gotten some thunderstorms or something like that to boost this. You can see the Puget Sound area has 50 to 70% of average precipitation over the past year, which is pretty sad to see. Even the coast and the Olympic Peninsula, the rainiest areas in the lower 48, only about 80% of average precipitation. And when you look all the way back here at 36 months, this is the past 3 years, you can see overall it's been quite dry. These last couple years have really skewed us toward being on the drier side. But you can see there, Puget Sound area at 70 to 80% of normal precipitation over the last 3 years. The coast at 90 to 100%, so it's pretty close. And then the Cascades, some areas down to about 50%. So it hasn't been great. And even if we look at the current month, so this is not really going to show us, I guess, that much. But since October 1st, this is our water year data. You can see above average in eastern Washington so far, below average in western Washington for the last couple months. We were pretty close in November, but we weren't right there. Our average temperature departure from average this year has been, see, we've been on the warm side this year as well, 1 to 3 degrees above average across the entirety of the state, except a little sliver of Whatcom County there is slightly below average. So yeah, it's interesting to see how far away from our averages we are. Another thing we can take a look at is the excessive rainfall outlooks. These are something that are important to look at because they kind of show you what the Weather Service is expecting in terms of probability of flooding. And there you can see it, the Cascades, the Coast Range, and the area kind of between Olympia and Portland has the highest chance of excessive rainfall that could result in flash flooding. And you can see that slight chance there across areas from Eugene all the way up to the Canadian border and down toward Vancouver there up in Canada. And that is where you have that marginal risk of excessive rainfall as you go into day 2 there. So that was Monday. This is Tuesday. Similar deal with a little bit less in the Cascades. And then Wednesday, it includes Seattle and Portland as well as that rainfall just piles up. Looking at the Weather Prediction Center's forecast for precipitation over 7 days, you can see you're showing like 5 inches in Tacoma, 3 inches in Seattle, 6 inches in 5.5 inches in Portland, and then up toward 10 plus inches in the Cascades. So there's definitely a lot of rain coming up. There definitely could be some problems with it, and it's something we have to watch, as always, very closely. There is a site here also on the Weather Service page that we can look at that will show, first of all, let's point this out. Coastal flood advisory up for the San Juans and some parts of Skagit, Snohomish, and Whatcom counties. Flood watch in effect for the entire region that's in effect through like the rest of the week. So it's one of the longest duration flood watches I've ever seen issued here. But this is the local forecast graphics page. I like to use this to take a look at this minimum snow level map, and this really is good at visualizing what's going to happen here with the snow level. So you can see today around 4,000 feet, higher tomorrow as we go into Sunday and Monday there. Actually, this is for Saturday through Sunday. You can see that snow level about 4,000 feet. Higher as we go into Monday, up to 5,000 feet for some of the mountains. Crashes down a little bit with the atmospheric river moving south Monday night and through Tuesday, but still it's below Stevens Pass, but there's not going to be very much precipitation. Still above Snoqualmie Pass. Atmospheric river moves back in. It goes up. The snow levels go way back up there, and then stay high up toward 5,000 feet, maybe even higher as we go into Thursday and Friday. And by Thursday there, you can see some parts of the southern Cascades getting up towards 6,500 feet in the snow levels, and that is what allows the flooding. And that's what makes me think, too, that all the flooding isn't going to be just on Tuesday, and it's likely going to be extended throughout the week. So that is something to note as well. We can take a look at some mountain temperatures. That's interesting. So here's Crystal Mountain ski area. We can try that. Hurricane Ridge. Those highs significantly up in the 40s. So it's going to be warm across most of the mountains, and that is what exacerbates that flooding. I'm not sure exactly when these are updated. We'll see if we get an update here tonight. It looks like they may be updated in the evening hours. So let me double check that here. That forecast was issued about 2:30 p.m. So we may get an update tonight, but it'll probably be after I'm done streaming. Be sure to let me know if you got any more questions you guys want me to answer in the chat about rivers, about wind, and stuff like that. And a little bit more progress on the UW model run, but not as far as I would like. We can look at the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere here on this one as well. Got a new tool here to loop through these forecast models, thanks to David Ovens of the University of Washington for doing this. And we can, if you kind of play this through, you can see that atmospheric river moving in, and then you can see it right there. Look at that atmospheric river, just a big atmospheric river moving into the area. This model keeps it a little bit further south than Seattle, so likely a bit too far south, but it's still showing a pretty significant atmospheric river for the region with some really high values of integrated vapor transport in there. That's basically an index showing how much water vapor is going across the ocean, because we got to put numbers to everything, so, and give everything a name and an index and stuff like that. And this is what that's doing, is showing how much water vapor is being transported across the ocean, integrated into those weather systems and in the jet stream and stuff like that. So that's where you get the term integrated vapor transport. And that's what we look at to kind of determine the strength of an atmospheric river. And we can look at that on the European model as well here. Bye, Brian. Thank you very much for tuning in, as always. Great to see you here. This is a new thing on WeatherBell. You can look at the integrated water vapor transport and sea level pressure at the same time. So you can see here, there's a lot of water vapor coming toward the area, and that's just the weaker atmospheric river that moves through parts of Oregon as we go through tomorrow. But then take a look at the big one just slamming in here. Look how big it is. Look how deep that moisture is. A lot of rain slamming into western Washington there on Monday. You can see how it's angled to really bring a decent amount of rain to Seattle on Monday, but then it pushes south. That flow turns more westerly and it gets blocked by the Olympics. It moves across Oregon, then some more rain moves back up into Washington, but because that flow is due west, Seattle gets blocked. Areas south of Seattle don't. And then you can see that atmospheric river continues hitting the area all the way through Wednesday and then through parts of Thursday before it starts to push north. And then we dry out finally as we go into Friday. So it's going to be a long one here across this week, going to be dealing with that atmospheric river. It's going to be either over us, near us, or back over us. All right, let's keep taking a look here at some other things. See if we get any update on the river flooding situation. Doesn't look like it. There's just definitely a lot to watch and kind of see how the forecasts shift around with the river flooding. That's the thing to watch, is how much it shifts, how much of a change we get in some of these river flooding forecasts over the next few days here. I do expect it will move around some. So stay tuned for more on that. I'll be sure to have some posts about it. One thing to point out is how you can follow me. So first of all, I'm on Twitter, or X if you want to call it that. This is where I do post the most, and so you can follow me there. I got some updates about this storm going on and stuff like that. Got the wind gust updates from yesterday. I'm also over on Blue Sky. You can follow me there as well. I believe the links to all of these are in the description of this video. But yeah, posting on Blue Sky as well. A lot of weather updates on there. And then, of course, if you want a little bit more community and stuff like that, go and check out the Western Washington Weather Facebook group there. This is what it looks like on my end, so I can kind of see, like, admitting people in the group and stuff like that. But we're up to 2,600 members, which is pretty cool. Here's some, look at this shot today. Actually, it's from Washington Weather Chasers on there. It posted that someone sent that to Ben. That's pretty cool. But yeah, got a lot of updates and stuff on the Washington weather, or Western Washington weather page. And I've got some group experts on there, some of whom are watching this stream right now. So Puget Sound Stormwatch is on there. My friend Mark Ingalls is on there. And then Benjamin Yurkovic there with Washington Weather Chasers is on there as well. So a great bit of content there on the Western Washington Weather Facebook group, so go and check that out. Last but not least, we can actually just compare some of these forecast models before we wrap things up here, just to kind of see how things are going, what kind of trends we're looking at here. So we can see here on the left, we have the European model, and on the right, we have the national blended models run by the National Weather Service. And overall, you can see these forecasts have come into pretty good agreement about how much rain we're going to get through Friday night. And you can see a good agreement on the Cascades getting between 10 and 15 inches of rain. And then the lowlands getting most from Seattle southward. About 3.5 inches in Seattle is the average that we're agreeing on here. But once you get south of Seattle, the National Blended Models with its higher resolution there on the right brings up the amounts a little bit, showing 4.5 to 5 inches for Tacoma, while the European model shows just about 4. And then down toward Olympia, the National Blended Models on the right shows 6 inches, and the European model shows about 5.5. So you can see also these higher resolution forecasts picking up some more of the terrain features here between Olympia and Portland than the European model with slightly lower resolution. So overall, this is a pretty significant amount of rain to get in 1 week at any time of the year, even in December, even one of our wettest times, and especially when you consider the fact that we will be melting a bit of snowpack and all of this rain is going to be hitting the Cascades in just a few days. You can see why the flooding threat is high. You can see why there is a lot of damage potential with this atmospheric river. The landslide threat is going to increase, and we're even going to have some potential for small stream flooding, creek flooding, stuff like that. You got to be careful for that. If you got creeks running across your property or nearby, they can swell a bit. They're not going to get like dangerous or erosive or anything like that, but they are going to be big. And even flooding on our roads. A lot of our roads, quite frankly, handle water quite terribly, and we're going to be seeing that very clearly as we go through the next few days here, especially Monday and then probably again on Wednesday and Thursday. But some of that road flooding may linger all the way through Tuesday and into Friday and stuff like that. So we clearly have a not necessarily a rough go of it, but a challenging few days across the region with all of this rain coming in just a short amount of time, especially areas from Seattle southward really going to get the brunt of this. And then, of course, if you're going to the Cascades, a lot of rain on those roads, and then that river flooding. So if you do live anywhere near a floodplain, be prepared, especially for some of those rivers I mentioned earlier that are going to get into some pretty high stages. So we will for sure talk about this again tomorrow in the video in the morning. And depending on how things go, I may do another live stream tomorrow night about the same time. Maybe a little bit later if we want to watch the European model run come in. But tomorrow we will for sure talk about, both in the video and if I do a live stream tomorrow night, we'll talk about the atmospheric river, the flooding forecasts, kind of the latest timing on that, and then we'll talk about that wind potential as we go into Monday and kind of see how that plays out with that gusty wind potential while we have a lot of rain moving through the area too. So it's definitely worth staying tuned to the channel. Be sure to like and subscribe and share the channel so we can get even more people engaged with Western Washington weather and how things are going across the region. Something to point out while I've got some folks watching here, just to wrap things up, before I talk about how we can follow Western Washington weather. Got the Western Washington weather merch store. The link to that, I can throw it in the chat at some point, or you can just go check it out through the channel. That is, let me throw that link in the chat real quick for anyone who wants some cool Western Washington weather merchandise. You can see t-shirts, hats, long sleeve shirts, tank tops, whatever you can think of really is on here. You've even got like an apron on here. So there's some pretty interesting stuff. So let me throw that link in the chat here real quick. There we go. I put that link in the chat if anyone wants to go check it out. Well, still got some people watching. Take a look at some of the interesting some of these interesting accessories we have on here. Got an apron, a tote bag. The tote bags I've heard has been pretty popular. Got some cool mugs and water bottles. Even got a dog bandana. Beanie, drawstring bag, bucket hat, nice Western Washington weather sticker. I have one of these, and take a look at that. We got a teddy bear. Look at that. Look at the Western Washington weather logo teddy bear. You could have a teddy bear with our channel logo on it, which is pretty cool. So, but of course, the shirts are pretty good. I just got myself one of these. It's actually this one right here. This this long sleeve shirt. It's a pretty nice one. I enjoyed that. It's nice to wear around and it's pretty soft too. So go and check out the Western Washington Weather merch store. Got occasional sales on the store. That's actually not controlled by me. It's controlled by the company called Spreadshop, which runs this site. But there are some sales coming up across the area. There's a sale that ends tonight, the Cyber Week sale, but we do have some more sales coming up, so stay tuned for that. And of course, thank you all very much for watching. As always, be sure to subscribe to Western Washington Weather right here on YouTube, and be sure to like and share, comment. All of that helps the algorithm a lot, so be sure to do that. And then be sure to follow the Western Washington Weather Facebook group, that and the Twitter and Blue Sky links are all in the description below, doing the same updates to all of these. So be sure to check them all out. And of course, for the most in-depth, detailed updates, check out the Western Washington Weather YouTube channel right here where you're watching this live stream. And be sure to go down below and click subscribe and like and share. So thank you all very much for watching. I'm going to wrap up this stream here. It's been good to talk to everybody. It has been good to get some questions answered, and we'll try to do this again tomorrow night if we can. So stay tuned for more, and please stay safe out there with all this weather coming up with the wind, and especially with all that rain. Stay safe out there. Stay tuned for more, and I will talk to you all later. Hope everybody has a great night out there. Thank you very much for watching.